In the previous video we created this template. We did however make a mistake. In the main.css we set this value as being the max height instead of the max width, and so I've gone ahead and just corrected that off screen. We are of course going to have more than one screen within our actual website, and so in this section we're just going to sketch out some of the templates that we're going to use within those other screens. And we're going to use this template that we've already created to help save us some time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a couple of copies of the index.php file. And I'm going to rename this one fixtures. I'm going to rename this one profile. This one will be team selection. And this final one will be referee input. We're actually going to change the fixtures one first. And the first thing that we're going to do is actually delete this table that we already have for the league table, which we inherited from the main page. On this page we actually want to display all of the fixtures. And we're going to display them grouped by the dates that they will be played. So for example, we will have a table specifically listing all of the fixtures which will be played on one date. We will then have a table listing all of the fixtures to be played on the next date, and so on. And we will list this inside of the h2 tag. So just for an example, we will use the 7th of the 1st, 2015 as an example date. We're going to have a table head. This is going to list the home. We're going to have a column for the versus, and then we're going to have a column for away, as well as the kickoff time. Within the body of the table, we're going to have the team name. We're then going to have just the letters VS, as well as the away team name. Followed by the time that it's going to kick off. So in this example it will be 3 PM. And we will have a row here for each actual event which is going to take place on this date. So if we take a look at this now, and we navigate to the fixtures page, we can see that we have our table. So as you can obviously see, we've not styled our table yet, so we will go ahead and do that now. And we will do that in the main CSS file again. And we're going to try to reuse some of the table detail that we used here within our league table functionality. With the league table functionality, we already styled this so that it will have borders, etc. And it would be useful if we can reuse this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from being defined by the ID league table to be defined by the class data. In fact, it would be table data. This means that we don't have to type the same code multiple times, we can just reuse it. So if we go back to the fixtures table now, and assign this to the class data, and refresh the page, we should inherit all of the style that we had with the league table page. But we obviously need to go back and apply this style to the league table correctly again, now that we've changed it from being defined by the ID to the class. So if we just go back to the index page and change this from league table being the ID to being the class data, we can go back to the home page and refresh this, and it will show us the correctly applied style sheet. So if we go back to our fixtures page, what we're actually going to do is output this table multiple times, once for each date that we're going to have actual events on. So to do that, we're going to need to output basically everything within this card so far multiple times. Now we could either create multiple cards to do this, or we can do this within one card. I'm going to create multiple cards just because it will actually look slightly better. And if we refresh this page now, we have multiple cards displaying multiple events each week. Obviously each one of these would change as well, so we can change this now. So we have the 7th, then we have the 14th, /21st, and 28th. And if we refresh this now, we have all of these dates. Now when it comes to actually creating the final version of this, we're going to actually use the correct team names. These are just placeholders. And we will actually link each of these fields to the profile page for each team. So we can go ahead and put those links in now. And when we're doing this, we're probably going to create an ID for each team. And so by doing this now, we're going to get an understanding of how we're going to actually create our PHP file structure. So we're going to basically have a blank profile page, and when combined with an ID that we're going to pass across as a get, it will display the correct details for that relevant team. We can go ahead and copy this across. So this might be team 2. And each of these lines will appear as this, which will obviously take us to the relevant page when we click it. I'm not going to go through all of these and apply this. This is just so that we can get an understanding of what we're going to do with this page. But when we do create the final version, we will have each of these elements actually linking across to the relevant profile page. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the profile page itself. So again, I'm going to delete all of the data within here. And on the profile page, we're actually going to have just a few details about the team itself. But we're going to actually pull data from many different sources. So for example, we're going to have the team name, underneath that we're going to have an image which will be the logo for the team. We obviously haven't created anything yet for that, so we're just going to leave that blank for now. To the right of the logo, we're going to have a table. Now we're not actually going to have a table head and table body section in this table. We're just going to list the table element's name on the left and the table element's data on the right. So we will have the manager's name. And then on the right of that, we will have the actual manager's name. We will then have the ground's name where the team plays their games. As well as the actual name of that ground. We will have the capacity of that ground. We'll have the address of the ground. And finally we will have the contact phone number. So if we have a look at this page now, which is the profile page, we obviously need to address this issue with the team logo. We want this to be to the left of the detail that we've got here, and we don't want this table to actually be center aligned, we want it to be left aligned. So these are some things that we will correct later on when it comes to styling this page. Now below all of this we want to have a separate paper shadow element. In here we're going to have details of the upcoming fixtures for the team. And this will be based on the information within the fixtures page that we've just created, but it will be filtered to just show the fixtures for this specific team. So I'm going to actually just copy and paste across what this will look like. Now we're obviously not going to have a separate element for each individual date. We will just add another row into here, another column, sorry. And we will obviously have multiple sets of data based on the actual fixtures that the team's going to play. And we may even go as far as to specify that this team will always be highlighted in bold, which also implies that we're not going to have a link to the profile page of this team, because we will already be on that team's profile page. So if we take a look at this again now, we will see that we have our own team name, which is always, in this case, italic. We can change this to strong instead if that makes it more clear. As well as a link to the away team's page. So we can change this to strong instead of emphasized. And then we can also add in the next section, which is going to be the results from the previous games. This is going to be a very similar format to the upcoming fixtures, except it's also going to list the score of the game, and it's not going to list the date and kick-off time. So if we change those emphasized elements to strong, and then we can basically copy this entire section down and rename it to results. So we're going to remove the date and the kick-off time as we said, but we're going to add in the home and away scores. We're not actually going to give these names in the table header section. It will hopefully be self-evident enough that that's what they're referring to. So if we refresh our page again, you can see that we've got our home team, or actual team, as being in bold, and we have our results section. We will obviously have multiple results here, so I'll just copy this down to make sure that that's evident. Like so. The next thing that we're going to add in for this page is the top goal scorer for the team. We're going to actually list the top 5 or so goal scorers. We can decide how many exactly later on. But to do this, we're just going to add in another card. So we will use the results page as a sample to actually help us along our way. So we're only going to have 2 actual pieces of data in this section. We're going to have the goal scorer name and the number of goals. We're not going to have any strong or emphasis within this, we're just going to have the player's actual name. And so we'll do this for, as we say, maybe the top 5 goal scorers. And if we refresh our page again, we will get our top goal scorers. So as I mentioned, we're going to restyle this section. All of the other sections seem styled well enough. And so as I say, we're going to move the logo to the left of this table, and we're going to left align the actual content within the table. So the table itself is at the top. We're going to create a class for this, which we're just going to call left align. And if we go into our style sheet, and then refresh the page, everything in that table should be left aligned. So finally we need to move this image from being above the actual table to being to the left of it. To do that, we're going to go ahead and actually give this image a class of being team logo. And then within our style sheet, we're going to set the class team logo to being 150 pixels tall, $150 wide, and we're just going to float it to the left. So now if we refresh our page again, this is what it's going to look like. We're going to have the actual logo to the left, then this table that we created, and Polymer is going to actually apply a clear fix for us. We don't need to worry about that ourselves. So even though we did float this to the left, we don't need to worry about that overflowing into other elements. We may also want to add some padding to the left of this table here, or rather to the right of the team logo. Just to help separate that out a bit. And that's more or less the profile page done. The next template that we're going to create is going to be the team selection page. So if we go across to the team selection page that we created earlier, and again delete this actual table which we're not going to use. So this page is going to be very simple, which is going to have a form, and we're going to have 2 main elements as well as some buttons within the middle of it. So for now we're just going to use a table to lay this out, but we may look at this again later. The first element that we're going to have is a selector element, and we're going to set this to multiple to allow us to actually select multiple elements. And we're going to have a number of options within this, which are all of the possible team players available for a specific game. We're going to have a title here, which will be the team name. We're also going to have one of these in our third section. But in this occasion we're going to have the heading selected. In fact, this should be available, and this is selected. In the middle column we're going to have 3 buttons. It's going to be a submit button, and it's simply going to have 2 greater than signs. We're then going to have basically the same thing, but we're going to have 2 less than signs. And then we're going to have a final button, which is submit. These should actually just be buttons rather than actual submit buttons, because we're going to handle all of the actual manipulation of moving a player from one column to another using JavaScript. So if we go across to team selection, we can see that we now have the options available to select team members for individual games. In terms of styling this page, we can make these form input boxes slightly bigger, as well as actually stack these 3 buttons one on top of each other. And we can also put the actual name of the game that the team is being selected for at the top. So for the buttons, we can just add line breaks. Which will stack those for us. When it comes to the select, we can actually apply some styling to this. We can set the height to be 20. In fact, that should be pixels, so we set that to 200 pixels. And we can set the width to be a certain percent. We'll try 10% to see how that looks. So you can see we obviously want this to be much wider in terms of the width of the actual inputs. So we'll set this to 150 pixels and try again. The idea with this page is that the manager of the team will select multiple people, click the arrow button, and then those people will appear on the right as being selected for a specific game. If they want to unselect a person for the game, they would select them from the right, click the left arrow button, which would move the names back into the available column. When the manager's happy, they will click the submit button, which will obviously submit the page, which will update our database. So finally we wanted to add the name of the game at the top. So to do that we're going to just add in header 1. And then in brackets we'll actually put the date and time of the game. So if we select this now, the manager will instantly be able to see what they're being asked to select a team for. So one final style adjustment that we're going to make is to actually centre this form. Before we actually finalise the form, we will look at the submit buttons and actually stylise them a bit more properly. But for now, we just want to actually centre the main form. So to do this, we're going to set the table to being with 100%. At the moment, it's automatically defaulting to be with auto. Now if you look at the main CSS, we don't actually want to use the data class, because this will actually add all of our borders for us as well. We don't want that in this case, we just want the actual data to be centered. And so we're just going to create a new class called table center. In fact, full width would be more appropriate. I'm just going to set the width property to 100%. And we're going to apply this class to the table. Now if you refresh the page now, you can see that it's automatically centered everything for us. With regards to the buttons, we can actually make a few changes to that very quickly here. So I'm going to remove the breakpoints here. And in our main.css, we can create a new button style. And we're going to display this as block. We're going to add some padding as well, or rather some margin. So if we refresh this now, we can see that they're spread out properly, but we still need to center align them. This is because we've specified that the horizontal alignment should have 16 pixels of margin. So if we change this to 16 auto, we can see that they're all correctly aligned now, with 16 pixels spacing vertically and automatically aligned horizontally. Now before we leave this page, we don't want to leave the buttons element in this state. All buttons on our entire website at the moment will be aligned like this. And so we're just going to go back and add a class to the actual button elements. So if we just add button center aligned, and because that's appended to the button element, it will automatically limit this so that the class can only be used by the button element. And if we refresh our page final time, we can see that there's no changes, which is what we wanted. Now the final template that we're going to look at is the referee input page. This is going to be quite similar to the actual team selection page. And so we're actually going to copy the code across from here. And we're going to replace the header, in fact the table that's already here, with our code again. We're going to change this from being select multiple to being select single. And the idea here is, instead of having these options, we're going to have the home team name and the away team name. We're going to have a drop down box with all of the players for each team listed. and we're going to ask the referee to select one of the players and then click an add button, which will be to the right here. When the add button is pressed, that will increase the score and set that player as being the goal scorer. So if we continue on, we've obviously got all of these players available to us. This will be for the home team. When we actually create this, this will be the actual team's name, not home team. In the away section, we're going to have the exact same thing, except this will be away team's name. As I say, we're also going to have some buttons here. This one's going to be an add sign, so we're going to have one which will be a minus sign, so that we can undo any erroneous inputs. And again, we'll have these elements at the bottom here for the second team, the away team. We're not going to have the left and right arrow buttons that we did have, which is going to keep the submit button, so that when the actual score has been input, we will be able to submit the score to our central database. So if we go across to the page now, which is referee input, we can see what we're going to be working with. Now immediately you can see that we have these drop down boxes, but they're the complete wrong shape and size. So we're going to need to go back and change the sizes for these within the style and apply a class to it so that we can actually refer to it properly. So if we go to our main.css and apply a style here to limit this to just being used within the team selection. And then on the team selection page, we can just apply the style here. And of course we need to do that for both elements. If we go back to our referee input page now and refresh our page, we can see this is what we're intending it to look like. So as I say, all of the player names for each team will be listed here. When a player is selected, the referee will be able to select the plus button to add another element here, which will basically clone this entire form input section. So you'll basically end up with something like this, except this will be one on top of each other. So we can just add a break here, and it will look like this. The more times we click the plus button, the more times we will get this element. If we click the minus button, we will basically just remove that specific line. So if we click this minus button, this section here will basically just be deleted, like so. We're also going to have the actual numerical score on this page as well. So to do that, if we add a new row, we'll have something which eventually looks like this. If we actually apply a class here, and we go ahead and style this class, the score class, and we'll just increase the font size, make it 3 EM. just so that it actually stands out. Now within our actual drop down boxes, we want to be able to have no selection at all, and so it will be important for us to have an actual option for that. We can work on this a lot more later on. As I say, this is just to create a template. In this instance, we could have this actual value selected. Which will actually reflect our score. So we have Joe Bloggs who has scored once here, as well as no one who has scored on this team. In this scenario, however, we would have a second line. And the value of this second line would be not selected. Because obviously clicking this plus will add a scorer. One final thing that I've just noticed before we move on is the actual name of this page, which is currently current positions. This should of course be referee input. And I'll just check that the other pages are correctly labelled as well. Team selection, and this should be profile. Now you may be wondering why we've gone through and created all of these templates, and the very simple answer is by creating these templates we now know exactly which parts of our form we're going to be able to include in our header section, which will be included on every single page, as well as which sections are going to be the more dynamic sections, as well as which sections we're going to include on our footer page. Because we're creating an MVC framework, we obviously want to eliminate as much duplication as possible, and so by getting an idea of what we're going to include on these pages, we're saving ourselves time later on. It also gives us the opportunity to actually consider the construction of the pages, which will allow us to actually create templates later on as well. If you've done any research into Polymer and web components, you will understand that the whole principle is that you create unique pieces of functionality which will then be able to be combined to create a more complex function. And so when we're creating our template later on, we will know that we will need to create an actual template for this section and another actual template for this section. And we will understand which parts of the form are repeating and which parts we can use data binding for, as well as which parts will be statically typed. In the next section we're going to be looking at creating a PHP MVC framework to actually allow us to create these pages much more quickly, based on the template that we've already created, as well as allowing us to create the unique pieces of functionality which are only used on each specific web page. So make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss that, and reload now. We're going to get our error. If we delete this, we're going to get our home page, which is the same page as index, which is also the same as index.index. We can, however, change this to index.news, which will change across to our news page.